There is a specific kind of silence that follows a tragedy, a hollow, ringing quiet that screams louder than any weeping mother ever could. In the photo remaining of Arthur Blackwood, taken just 3 days before the incident, his eyes do not look like the eyes of an 11-year-old boy. They are flat, ancient, and terrifyingly calm. If you look closely at the image, you can see his hands resting on his lap. They are not clenched in anger. They are not trembling in fear. They are folded perfectly at rest, like a priest who has just absolved a sinner or an executioner who has just cleaned his blade. He looks at the camera as if he knows something you don't, and as the investigators would soon discover, he did. In the biting, iron-grey January of 1924, on a wind-battered ridge overlooking the frozen Atlantic in Crow's Hollow, Maine, the county sheriff pushed open the door to the Blackwood estate and walked into a nightmare that would freeze the marrow in his bones. It wasn't the violence that made Sheriff Miller vomit on the doorstep that morning. It was the peace. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the foyer, a sound that Miller later described as the heartbeat of the house. The air inside was stiflingly warm, smelling of peppermint, old paper, and a sharp, underlying chemical scent that stung the nostrils, something like formaldehyde masking the scent of lavender. In the parlor, arranged on the velvet settee with meticulous, loving care, sat the 3 Blackwood daughters, Mary, age 9, Martha, age 7, and little Ruth, just 5 years old. They were dressed in their Sunday best, white lace frocks starched to perfection, their hair brushed until it shone in the winter light, filtering through the heavy drapes. They looked for all the world like porcelain dolls placed on a shelf. Their hands were folded in their laps. Their heads were tipped slightly back against the cushions. They were stone dead. Sitting across from them in a high-backed leather armchair was Arthur. He was wearing his woolen coat, buttoned to the chin, his school cap resting on his knee. On the small table beside him lay a fountain pen and a leather-bound ledger, a diary. When the sheriff entered, gun drawn, shaking from the sheer, unnatural wrongness of the scene, Arthur didn't raise his hands. He didn't cry. He simply closed the book, looked Miller in the eye, and whispered a sentence that was initially recorded as a confession of madness, but would later be understood as the most heartbreaking plea for understanding ever uttered in that county. I couldn't let him finish the collection. At the time, the authorities believed Arthur Blackwood was a monster, a child born with a rot in his soul, a bad seed who viewed his siblings as competition. The press called him the boy butcher, though he hadn't shed a drop of blood. They said he was jealous of the affection his father lavished on the girls. They said he was a psychopath who suffocated them while they slept to watch the light go out of their eyes. But they didn't read the diary. Not really. They skimmed it for admission of guilt. Who found it and closed the case. It would take 50 years for the full text to be analyzed and for the context of those entries to be cross-referenced with the business records of his father, Tobias Blackwood. What was dismissed as the rambling of a jealous brother was actually a detailed, desperate log of a rescue mission. Arthur wasn't the villain of this story. He was the only line of defense against a horror so sophisticated, so devoid of basic humanity that the mind recoils from it. The question isn't why Arthur killed them. The question you need to ask yourself is, what was he saving them from? To understand the weight of what happened in that house, we must understand the diary. It is a document of escalating dread, written with a vocabulary and precision far beyond Arthur's 11 years, a testament to a child forced to grow up too fast in a house of secrets. But before we open those pages, I need you to understand that this investigation will go to places that are uncomfortable. We are going to examine the dynamics of a family that looks perfect from the outside, but is rotting from the inside. We will uncover a conspiracy of silence that involved not just a father, but a network of wealthy elites who viewed human life as a commodity. Arthur Blackwood is not a ghost story. He is a mirror reflecting the darkest capabilities of men who believe they are above morality. By the end of this account, you will have to answer a question that haunts me to this day. If you knew what Arthur knew, if you saw what he saw in that basement, would you have the strength to do what he did? This story is a puzzle, and the pieces are scattered through the next hour. Pay attention to the dates, pay attention to the father's profession, pay attention to the medicine the girls were given, and most importantly, pay attention to the silence. If you have the stomach for the truth, and if you want to support our investigation into the forgotten corners of history where the real monsters hide, please make sure you are subscribed. We release a new inquiry every week, and we need your help to keep the lights on in the archives. The Blackwood estate, perched on a granite cliff known locally as the Widow's Watch, was a monument to isolation. Built in the late 1890s, it was a structure designed to look inward. The windows were narrow, like squinting eyes, and the high stone walls of the garden were topped with iron spikes, ostensibly to keep the deer out, but effectively keeping the family in. In 1924, the winter was particularly cruel. Snowdrifts piled 6 feet high against the siding, sealing the house in a cocoon of white silence. Tobias Blackwood, the patriarch, was a man of immense, quiet presence. Standing 6'4", with a gaunt face and hands that were always invariably gloved in thin white cotton or leather, he commanded the room without raising his voice. He was a widower, his wife having died giving birth to Ruth 5 years prior. Tobias was a scholar, a man of science who had retreated from the academic world of Boston to pursue independent research in Maine. He was known in the village as a preservationist. People assumed this meant he restored old books, or perhaps taxidermy for hunters, which wasn't entirely wrong, but was marvelously, tragically incomplete. Arthur, the eldest and only son, was small for his age. His physical description in the police report notes, slight build, impale complexion, evidence of chronic insomnia. He was his father's shadow, but never his partner. In town, store clerks noted that Arthur seemingly never blinked. He would watch interactions with an intense analytical stare, absorbing details. The girls, Mary, Martha, and Ruth, were the jewels of Tobias's existence. And this is where the unease begins, in the very bedrock of the world Arthur inhabited. Most fathers love their children. Tobias admired his daughters. He treated them not as people, but as artifacts. Visitors to the house, few as they were, remarked on how the girls were always impeccably clean. They were never allowed to play in the mud, never allowed to run lest they scrape a knee. Their skin was kept pale, shielded from the sun by heavy bonnets and parasols, even in winter. Tobias called them his pristine angels. This obsession with physical perfection is our first thread. It seems like the eccentricity of a grieving father wanting to protect what was left of his family. But Arthur's diary, starting in November of 1923, paints a different picture. November 14th, 1923. Father measured Mary again tonight, not just her height. He used the silver calipers. He measured the distance between her eyes, the length of her fingers, the width of her wrists. He wrote the numbers in the black ledger. He smiled when he was done. He told her she hadn't changed a millimeter in 3 months. He gave her an extra spoonful of the sweet tonic as a reward. Mary slept for 14 hours. I checked her breathing 4 times. She felt cold. The sweet tonic, a seemingly innocent detail, a father giving his sickly children vitamins in a harsh winter. But why did they sleep so long? And why was a father measuring his daughter's wrist width with calipers designed for engineering? The world of the Blackwoods was a cage of measurement and control, disguised as a sanctuary. To understand why Arthur acted, we must understand what he loved. The tragedies that hurt us most are the ones where we can see the love that existed before the fall. Arthur was not a cold brother. Despite the stoic face in the photograph, the diary reveals a boy who was fiercely, painfully devoted to his sisters. He was their mother, their teacher, and their shield. Tobias was often locked in the basement, his studio for days at a time, leaving Arthur to manage the household. The diary entries from December show a routine that is touching in its domesticity. Arthur would read to them by the fire, Grimm's fairy tales specifically. He writes about braiding Ruth's hair because she cried when the housekeeper did it. He writes about saving his own portion of sugar to give to Martha, who had a sweet tooth but was denied candy by Tobias, who feared it would blemish her skin. December 3rd, 1923, Ruth asked about Mama today. I showed her the locket. She asked why Father never looks at us when he speaks, only at our hands or our hair. I told her he is a man of great focus. I lied. I know why he looks. He looks at us the way the butcher looks at the hanging sides of beef in Mr. Henderson's shop windows, assessing the quality of the grain. I made Ruth a doll out of old socks, so she would have something soft to hold. Father burned it. He said it was squalid and filthy. He gave her a porcelain doll from Germany instead. It is hard and cold, and its eyes don't close. Ruth is afraid of it. I let her sleep in my bed tonight. Here is the third trigger bomb, hidden in plain sight. The porcelain doll. Tobias hates the soft, the organic, the filthy sock doll. He replaces it with something hard, unmoving, and perfect. It's a microcosm of his parenting. He doesn't want children, he wants statues. Arthur's role was that of a buffer. He absorbed the strange tyranny of his father so the girls wouldn't have to. But as winter deepened, the buffer began to wear thin. The girls were growing, despite the tonic, despite the lack of exercise. They were growing, and growth, in Tobias Blackwood's eyes, was not a miracle, it was a flaw. December 12, 1923. Mary coughed at dinner, a small thing. Father dropped his fork. The sound was like a gunshot. He stared at her, not with concern, but with disappointment. He took her to the studio immediately for treatment. She cried. She didn't want to go down there. The smell, she says, the smell makes her dizzy. When she came back up an hour later, she smelled like the fluid he uses on the Beatles. She didn't cough again. She didn't speak again all night. Something is wrong. We feel it. You feel it. The studio is a place of correction, but not the kind we know. And the fluid is moving from the Beatles to the children. The pivotal shift in the narrative, the moment the slow creep of dread turned into an active countdown, occurred on Christmas Eve. Arthur was sent to the post office in the village to collect a package for his father. Tobias was meticulous about his mail, usually collecting it himself, but a bout of gout had left him housebound. He gave Arthur strict instructions. Do not open it, do not drop it, bring it straight to the studio. Arthur was an obedient boy, but he was also a curious one, and the package was damaged. A corner of the heavy brown wrapping paper had torn during transit. As Arthur trudged back up the snowy incline to the house, he noticed a letter inside the package had slipped partially out of the box it was taped to. December 24th, 1923. I shouldn't have looked. I know I shouldn't have looked, but the handwriting was so strange. Spidery and thin. It was from a man in New York, a Mr. C. Aloysius. I pulled the letter out just a little to read the top. It said, "Regarding the acquisition of the lot. I trust the specimens remain in peak condition. The client is particularly anxious about the maturation of the eldest on the 12th of February. We expect delivery of the prime specimen no later than the 14th. Ensure the preservation process has begun internally to prevent degradation during transport." The words specimen, acquisition, and preservation process. Arthur didn't understand the full scope, but he understood the date. February 12th came and went 1,000 times in his mind. It was Mary's birthday. She would be 12. Arthur arrived home and handed the package to his father. He watched Tobias read the letter. He watched his father smile, a rare, genuine smile of satisfaction. Tobias looked at Mary, who was playing quietly by the fire. He walked over and stroked her hair. "Almost ready," he whispered. "Perfection is a matter of timing. This is the first disturbance, the introduction of commerce into the family dynamic. The girls aren't just being measured, they are being prepared for sale. But for what purpose? The preservation process has begun internally. The tonic, the vitamins. New questions flood our minds. What happens on the 12th birthday? Why does the client want a 12-year-old? And what does internal preservation mean for a living human being? The mystery deepens, and the shadow over the house grows long and terrible. Reaction is the truest test of character. A lesser child might have run away. A different child might have confronted the father. Arthur did what Arthur always did. He observed and he analyzed. But the cracks were showing. December 26, 1923. I cannot eat. The meat at dinner tastes like ash. I look at Mary and I see a deadline. I asked Father today what happens when we grow up. I asked if Mary would go to school in the city when she turns 12. He laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. Mary has a higher calling, Arthur. She's destined for immortality. Beauty must be captured before it fades. Adulthood is a rot. We must save her from the rot. He thinks he's a savior. He truly believes it. Arthur tried to test the boundaries. He attempted to stop giving the girls the tonic. On the morning of December 28th, he knocked the bottle over, feigning an accident. It shattered. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Tobias didn't strike Arthur. That would be crude. Instead, he locked Arthur in the coal chute for 6 hours without a coat. When Arthur was finally let out, blue-lipped and shivering, Tobias was waiting with a new bottle. "Precision, Arthur," Tobias said softly, gripping Arthur's shoulder with a force that bruised. "Routine is the only thing separating us from chaos. If they miss a dose, the process reverses. The purity is compromised. Do you want them to rot? Do you want them to be ugly, like everyone else?" Here, we see the fourth trigger bomb. The reaction to the broken bottle. It wasn't anger at the waste of money. It was panic that the process would reverse. This implies the tonic is actively altering their physiology. Tobias is terrified of the rot, which we now understand simply means puberty. He views natural growth as a disease to be cured. The tension in the house became unbearable. Arthur realized he wasn't just a brother, he was an inmate, and the warden was insane. The doubt seeded here is critical. Is Tobias simply a fanatic, or is he actually delivering them to a fate worse than death? To understand Tobias Blackwood, we must look backward. The narrator often finds that the roots of a crime are buried years before the event. Investigating the academic records of the era reveals that a T. Blackwood was expelled from the faculty of a prestigious medical college in 1908. The reason for expulsion was unethical conduct regarding anatomy procurement and unauthorized chemical experimentation on living tissue. There were rumors, whispers in the faculty lounge, that Blackwood was obsessed with the concept of biological stasis. He was searching for a way to pause cellular decay permanently. He wasn't looking for immortality in the sense of living forever. He was looking for eternal preservation. He wanted to turn living things into perfect, unchanging statues. In the archives of the local historical society, there is a mention of a local legend from 1915, shortly after the Blackwoods moved to Crow's Hollow. A transient drifter had gone missing. His body was found months later in the woods, but it hadn't decomposed. It looked plasticized, waxy. The authorities blamed the freezing peat bog, but the local doctor noted a chemical smell. This historical layer reframes everything. Tobias isn't just an abusive father. He is a disgraced scientist continuing his life's work, and his daughters are his final experiment. He has been breeding them for this. The isolation, the diet, the lack of sun. It was all to create the perfect canvas. The twist is approaching. We now know the what preservation, but the how and the why are about to become personally devastating for Arthur. January 1924 arrived with a blizzard that buried Maine under 4 feet of snow. The roads were impassable, the telegraph lines were down. The Blackwood estate was now effectively its own planet. January 10th, 1924. The snow is up to the second-story windows. We are trapped. Father is ecstatic. He says the cold is good for the preparation. He has moved the date up. He says Mary doesn't need to wait for her birthday. The client is impatient, he told me, and the specimen is ripe. He is preparing the studio. I heard him sharpening the instruments, the sound of metal on whetstone. It went on for hours. Sht, sht, sht. Arthur's desperation leaps off the page. The moral dilemma here is excruciating. What do you do when the authority figure in your life becomes the predator? Arthur couldn't fight Tobias. The man was 3 times his size. He couldn't run. The snow made escape a suicide mission for the girls. He couldn't call for help. The escalation is palpable. The client is coming, or perhaps Tobias is going to perform the final procedure himself and ship the result. The stakes are absolute. It is no longer about abuse. It is about survival. Comment bait. Put yourself in this room. You are 11 years old. It is 1924. There is no 911. There is no internet. There is only the snow, the sharpening of knives, and your sisters sleeping in the next room. What is the moral choice? Do you try to kill the father and likely fail, or do you find another way? Then a contradiction. On January 12th, Arthur writes an entry that confused police for decades. January 12th, 1924. I heard them laughing today. Father was in the parlor with Mary. He was showing her a book of butterflies. He explained how they are caught and kept beautiful forever. Mary seemed enchanted. She told me later, Daddy says I'm going to be a princess. I'm going to be beautiful forever like the butterflies. I won't ever get old and sick like Mama. She wants it, she doesn't understand, but she wants it. Does that make it right? If she consents to the cage, is it still a cage? This contradicts the narrative of the terrified victim. Mary is being groomed. She is being brainwashed into accepting her fate. This makes Arthur's position even more isolated. He isn't just fighting his father, he is fighting the twisted narrative his father has spun for the girls. They trust Tobias, they think they are special, they think the procedure is a gift. This complexity builds trust in the narrator. We admit that the situation isn't black and white. It complicates the impending tragedy. If Mary walks willingly into the studio, is it murder or is it a sacrifice? Subscribe now to see how this twisted logic resolves. The connection coalesces in the early hours of January 14th. Arthur sneaks into the kitchen to steal food. He has been hoarding scraps, planning a futile escape. He finds the black ledger on the table. Tobias has left it open. January 14th, 1924. I read the formula, the tonic. It isn't just vitamins, it's arsenic. Small doses, strychnine, formalin. He's been embalming them. He's been slowly saturating their tissues so that when the final moment comes, the cells hold their shape. That's why they are so cold. That's why they sleep so much. They are already half dead. He isn't going to kill them and then stuff them. He is going to preserve them while they are alive. The process requires the heart to be beating, to pump the final resin through the veins. It hurts. The book says it hurts. Significant vocalization expected during displacement phase. He knows it will be agony. He doesn't care. This is the fifth trigger bomb detonation. The cold skin mentioned in scene 5 and 6. The lethargy. It wasn't just control, it was chemical preparation. The connection is made. The preservation is a vivisection process, a chemical replacement of blood with resin while the victim is conscious. The horror is no longer abstract. It is mechanical, chemical, and inevitable. With this new knowledge, Arthur re-examines everything. His father's love is revealed as the love of a collector for a stamp or a coin. The grooming of Mary is to ensure she lies still during the initial incisions. Arthur realizes there is no escape. If they run into the snow, they freeze. If they stay, they face the knife and the resin. But Arthur finds a third option, a dark, terrible option that only a child stripped of hope could conceive. January 15th, 1924. I cannot fight him, I cannot stop the client, but I can spoil the goods. If the heart stops before the resin is introduced, the process fails. The capillaries collapse, the bloom fades, the specimen becomes worthless. Squalid, as father says. He only wants them if they are perfect. If they are dead, they are just bodies. Arthur realizes that death is the only safety. Death is the only way to break the contract. If they are dead, they cannot be preserved alive. They cannot be sold. They become waste. The investigation takes a turn here. We realize Arthur isn't planning a murder out of hate. He is planning a mercy killing to prevent torture. He is deciding to become a sinner, to save them from being saints. The night of January 16th, the storm is howling. The house is groaning under the wind. Tobias announces that the procedure for Mary will begin at dawn. Get them to bed early, Arthur. Tomorrow is a momentous day. Arthur helps them into their nightgowns. He brushes their hair one last time. He gives them the tonic, but he doesn't take his. He needs to satisfy the routine so Tobias doesn't suspect. January 16th, 1924, 8 p.m. I told them a story about sleeping beauties. I told them that tonight, if they sleep very still, they will wake up in a place where it is always summer. Mary asked if father would be there. I said no. She smiled. That was the hardest part, seeing her smile. The tension is unbearable. We know the outcome. We saw the bodies in scene 3, but now we know the weight of it. Arthur is waiting for the house to go quiet. He's waiting for his father to go to the basement to prep the fluids. The full horror of the morning follows. Tobias emerges from the basement at dawn, pushing a gurney with straps and tubes. He enters the parlor. He sees his daughters. Arthur writes one final entry before the sheriff arrives. January 17th, 1924, 7 a.m. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He looked at Mary, then he looked at the clock. He checked her pulse. Then he looked at me. He didn't ask, "Why did you kill them?" He said, "You have damaged the merchandise, Arthur. The client will be displeased." That was it. That was the end. He went back to the basement to clean his tools. He is down there now. He is burning the papers. I am waiting for the sheriff. I hope they hang me. I hope there is a hell, so I can stand at the gate and make sure father never gets in to see them. The horror isn't the murder. The horror is the father's reaction. Damaged merchandise. The total absence of paternal love, replaced entirely by commercial disappointment. The client was real. The sale was real. Arthur stopped a transaction of human flesh. We see the studio through the narrator's description now. The police photos of the basement, the vat of resin, the surgical table with restraints sized for a child, the letters filed under export. It was an assembly line. The revelation. Arthur creeps into the room. He holds a pillow. This is the moment the boy butcher is born. But watch his hands. January 16th, 1924, 10:30 p.m. I started with Ruth. She's the smallest. I didn't want her to wake up and see. I put the pillow over her face. I lay on top of her. I whispered that I loved her. She struggled for a moment, just a flutter like a bird in a net. Then she was still. I cried so hard my nose bled onto the sheet. I had to cut the spot out so father wouldn't see. This recontextualizes the cold brutality the police saw. The cut sheet, investigators thought it was a ritual. It was Arthur covering his tracks so he could finish the job. Next was Martha. She was dreaming. She murmured something about candy. I pressed down. I felt her heart beat against my chest. Thump, 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 stop, I'm a monster, I'm a monster, I'm a savior. Then Mary, my sweet Mary. She woke up before I could do it. She saw the pillow. She saw my face. I told her, I'm stopping the bad man. I'm stopping the pain. She looked at me, and she nodded. She closed her eyes. She let me do it. She knew. Somewhere inside, she knew. The twist detonates. Mary knew. The trigger bomb of her enchantment with the butterflies was a coping mechanism. Deep down, she was terrified. She accepted death from her brother rather than beauty from her father. Arthur didn't just kill them. He dressed them. He posed them. Why? I dressed them in their Sunday best. I sat them in the parlor. I wanted father to see them, not as specimens, but as girls. I wanted him to see that they were gone, that he couldn't have them, that he couldn't sell them. I wanted to see his face when he realized his collection was ruined. And the pristine angels were a final act of rebellion. By posing them perfectly, Arthur was mocking his father's obsession. You want statues? Here they are. But the life is gone. The value is gone. The aftermath was quiet. Too quiet. Tobias Blackwood was arrested, but not for murder. He hadn't killed anyone. He was charged with gross negligence and improper disposal of biological waste. He hired a high-powered lawyer from Boston, funded presumably by the mysterious client. He served 3 years in a sanatorium and was released. He died in 1932, a wealthy recluse. Arthur Blackwood was not so lucky. The legal system in 1924 did not understand mercy killing or psychological duress in children. He was declared criminally insane. He was sent to the St. Dymphna's Institute for the criminally insane. He never spoke again, not one word. He spent the rest of his life sitting in a chair by the window, hands folded in his lap, staring at the snow. The staff said he was a model patient. He died in 1941 of tuberculosis. He was 28 years old. The girls were buried in the town cemetery. Their graves are small. Tobias never visited them, but Arthur. The nurses say that every year on February 12th, Mary's birthday, Arthur would weep silently for exactly 1 hour. We like to believe that monsters look like monsters. We want them to have fangs and claws, but sometimes the monster is a man in a velvet smoking jacket who calls his children angels. And sometimes the hero is a boy with a pillow, forcing himself to do the unthinkable to prevent the unendurable. Arthur Blackwood's diary sits in the evidence locker of the Maine State Police to this day. It is a testament to the terrible choices love can demand. He became a killer to stop a torture. He sacrificed his soul to save their bodies from becoming mere objects. As you go to sleep tonight, look at your door. Make sure it's locked. But remember, the Blackwood sisters were locked in, safely, with their father. The danger wasn't outside. Was Arthur a villain, or was he the bravest boy who ever lived? I leave that judgment to you, but before you decide, ask yourself what you would have done if you heard the knives sharpening in the dark. This is Grim Inquiries. Thank you for watching.